Next Chapter Podcasts.
From the history of radioactive makeup to all the loony things Henry VIII did to ensure we never stop making movies about him, Weird History is a podcast that answers all the questions you didn't even know you had about the most unbelievable people, places, and events of the past. Based on the hugely successful YouTube channel, Weird History invites you to bone up on what it was like to use a public bathroom in ancient Rome while learning about the single worst year of all time. Don't worry, we missed it by a millennium or so. Then get the skinny on modern history, like the true story behind The Conjuring, and just what the hell Steven Seagal did to get banned from SNL. Let Weird History be your guide to the stranger side of history they don't teach you in school. Because the past is weird, a lot weirder than you think. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
The world is growing more complicated by the day, but too often, everyone seems to be operating on the same old assumptions about global affairs. But if you're not sure that world domination by the United States is the right path for America or the world, or if you've got questions about conventional geopolitical thinking, you should check out American Prestige, a foreign policy podcast from a different perspective. Every week on American Prestige, historian and former Bernie Sanders foreign policy advisor Daniel Bessner, that's me, and my co-host, the journalist Derek Davison, analyze U.S. foreign policy from a critical framework that sheds light on myriad topics related to international affairs. So, if you're curious to know what U.S. foreign policy would look like if the interests of all people in the world, and not only rich Americans, were taken into account, then check out American Prestige at AmericanPrestigePod.com. That's AmericanPrestigePod.com. And you could, of course, also find us on your favorite podcast app.
I'm not going to prepare any differently if I was doing Georgia and Alabama than I am if I was doing Grambling and Southern. You know what you have. You spend time with the coaches. You have a production call. You know, you talk to them about their players, what their theme is, what their goals are, the do's and don'ts, the good, bad, and the ugly of each team, and you just look for a good game.
If you trace the history, college football became this vehicle for the South to represent itself to the other regions of the country. You're talking about a region that had high infant mortality rate, incredibly high poverty rate, rampant violence, rampant racism, high levels of illiteracy, and was generally looked down upon by people in other regions of the country. And so here was this thing that Southerners could hang their hat on and say, you know, we may be a bunch of country bumpkins, but we just kicked your ass in football.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it, but it's like this the South got something to say.
Hello, and welcome to Our New South, a podcast series presented by Levine Museum of the New South in Charlotte, North Carolina. Levine Museum connects the past to the future to realize the promises of a New South. To learn more and donate to projects like this, visit museumofthenewsouth.org. Hi, my name is Kevin Blackistone of the Washington Post, coming to you from the University of Maryland, where I teach, and I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Robert Greene II, a professor of history at Claflin University. Our New South Season 2 explores the complexities of the many New Souths that make up today's New South. The series highlights opportunities and challenges that different communities face, diving into censorship and healthcare, tourism and religion, struggles for rights and resources, and the global reverberations of New South culture.
We thank you for joining us on this journey and for making the show a Signal Award and Anthem Award winner. Follow the show, rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Okay, let's get to today's episode of the show.
The South got something to say.
Today's episode of Our New South explores the enduring connection between college football, Southern identity, and the cultural legacy of HBCUs.
College football in the South is more than just a game. It's a tradition, a community, and for many, a second religion. But its history is complex, intertwined with race, segregation, and the evolution of Southern society.
Yes, from the early days of football at HBCUs and PWIs to the multi-billion-dollar industry it is today, the sport has shaped and been shaped by the region's social and economic changes. With the rise of NIL deals, conference realignments, and new opportunities, the future of Southern college football remains an open field.
Before we get to our guests, I would like to ask Dr. Robert Greene to take a step back and look at how college football became a defining feature in Southern culture and how its history reflects the broader evolution of the region.
College football in the U.S. South combines everything that makes the South the South. A communal atmosphere, plenty of tasty food, and passions that run as deep as the Mississippi River. How we got to this point, however, is critical to understanding broader trends in the history of both the South and college football itself. Indeed, the history of college football in the South stretches as long as the history of the idea of a New South itself does. To give a sense of the scale of college football in the region, keep in mind that some of the largest sports stadia in the world are for college football. Kyle Field for Texas A&M, Neyland Stadium for the University of Tennessee, Tiger Stadium for Louisiana State University, and Bryant-Denny Stadium for the University of Alabama all hold over 100,000 passionate football fans. Southeastern Conference football routinely leads in the ratings every Saturday afternoon and evening in the fall. In 2023, the SEC took in a record $853 million in revenue, showing that big football equals big bucks south of the Mason-Dixon line. The first college football game was played in 1869 at the height of the Reconstruction era between Rutgers University and Princeton. The game would not make its way south, however, until the first era of the New South in the 1870s and 1880s. By that point, memories of the American Civil War and its aftermath were being passed down to a new generation of white male Southerners. These younger white Southerners looked for a way to prove their masculinity while, perhaps, also finding a way to avenge the defeat of their fathers and older brothers in the Civil War. In time, college football will provide a way to do both. However, college football was not only important to white Southerners, and the story of college football in the U.S. South goes well beyond schools in the SEC or ACC. While schools such as the University of Georgia and Auburn began playing football in the early 1890s, their black counterparts such as Howard also began playing the sport. What we now call historically black colleges and universities, like the white universities, were major centers of learning, education, and culture. Eventually, like everything else in the South, two worlds of football would develop, one white, one black. The state of South Carolina provides one example of this. While both Clemson University and the University of South Carolina have provided numerous star players in football, it is South Carolina State University, an HBCU located in Orangeburg, South Carolina, that has produced the largest number of NFL Hall of Famers out of all the universities in the Palmetto State, with 4 and counting. Other Hall of Famers that attended HBCUs include Jerry Rice of Mississippi Valley State and Walter Payton of Jackson State. Meanwhile, college football at predominantly white institutions in the 20th century has undergone a profound transformation, where college football stadiums in places such as Oxford, Mississippi, or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, were once shrines to both football and white supremacy. By the end of the 20th century, they became places where both white and black Southerners could congregate to enjoy what is arguably the second most important religion in the U.S. South. Black Southerners began to play at these PWIs in the 1960s, but the symbolic beginning of black talent going to white schools in the South can be dated back to September 12, 1970, when Southern Cal demolished Bear Bryant's Alabama team, proving that Alabama and other schools in the Deep South had to finally tap into the deep reservoir of football talent in the region. One wonders what Southern football will look like today if black players had been allowed at schools in the SEC and the ACC long before the 1960s and 1970s. But one can also wonder about the state of the South itself today if black people had been given equal access and opportunity instead of Jim Crow, separate and unequal, as they were for far too long. Now, the story of college football includes robust teams and traditions at the football championship subdivision level, such as Furman University of South Carolina, and vibrant programs in Division II, such as Valdosta State in Georgia. Today, college football in the South serves as a civil religion that brings together everyone across lines of color, class, caste, and ethnicity. Our first guest is Charlie Neal. Charlie is a pioneering sports broadcaster and one of the most influential voices in college athletics. Currently, he is the lead play-by-play announcer for HBCU Go TV Sports and his career spans over 4 decades. He started as a sports anchor in 1971 and later became the lead play-by-play announcer and executive producer for BET Sports, where he helped bring Black college athletics to national television. Neal has also worked with CBS Sports, Turner Sports, and ESPNU, where he called the network's first ever football game. He has been a key figure in MEAC basketball coverage and currently leads HBCU Go's expanding football and basketball broadcast. His contributions to Black college athletics have earned him inductions into the MEAC, CIAA, and Black College Football Halls of Fame, along with the National Football Foundation's Chris Schenkel Award and a spot in the 2024 SWAC Hall of Fame. Our New South welcomes Charlie Neal.
Charlie Neal, the legend, the Hall of Famer. Thank you so much for joining my co-host Robert and I on this episode of Our New South. I've known you for a few years.
1 or 2, KB.
1 or 2. And I was reminiscing with J.A. Adonde and Michael Wilbon just a few weeks ago. And I can't remember the genesis of the conversation, but we were talking about who we knew who was Black in sports media when we were coming up. And it was Jim Hill for J.A. Adonde in L.A., and, of course, Wilbon had several choices in Chicago, where he grew up. And for me, it was you with Channel 4 here in Washington, D.C., as a sports anchor.
Yeah.
That was a couple years ago.
1 or 2.
Yeah. So this is great to talk to you in this forum. But as always, when we start our cast here, we always ask our guests to introduce themselves to our audience by telling them who you are, where you're at, and what it is you do.
First of all, KB, to say that was 50-some years ago, you don't look that old.
Grecian formula.
I hear you. But, it's first of all, it's an honor to be with you and Robert on your podcast. Thanks for having me. My, I guess, claim to fame in this day and time is being a sports broadcaster and basically being strictly, or not strictly, but heavily involved with historically Black colleges and universities in terms of sports broadcasting. Basically, it all started for me in terms of the HBCU avenue in 1980 with BET and Bob Johnson put together Black Entertainment Television. I had done sports prior to that on a local level, like you said, in Washington, D.C. I had worked in Philadelphia, and I was working in Detroit when BET was founded. And I stayed in Detroit for 7 years until I went to New York, to WCBS in New York. But during that time, that's when Bob Johnson contacted me. I didn't know Bob from a Man in the Moon. It was in 1980. It was the summer. He called me and he said, look, this is what I want to do. I want to put together a Black TV network. And part of that is I want to have sports be a part of it. Your name came up and was recommended to me. And we need to sit down and talk. So he flew to Chicago. I drove out from Detroit to Chicago, met him on a Sunday at O'Hare Airport at the hotel there. We sat down and we talked about his vision, what he believed in, what he wanted to do, and wanted to see if I was interested in being a part of his vision. And I told him I believed in what he did. I said, some other people have tried it, thought about it, but it was not successful. I said, but here's an opportunity. And the first thing he said, well, I don't have a lot of money to pay you. I said, listen, it's not about the money now. I'm already working in local television. All I have to do is you get me to where I need to be for a game. As long as I'm not losing money, I'm okay with it. And that's how our relationship started back in 1980. And of course, it blew up from there. And then, along the way, I also did work at, like I said, WCBS in New York, CBS Sports in New York. I also did Turner. I did the NBA. I was halftime. I was the Ernie Johnson way back in...
Before Ernie Johnson. That's
yeah,
right.
Before Ernie Johnson. And so, again, but I maintained that whole relationship with BET the whole way. We were at every major event, whether it's the Super Bowl, NBA All-Star Game, World Series baseball. That's where I really got to know Deion Sanders when he was playing baseball, when they were playing Toronto Blue Jays in the World Series. So, I mean, so we got a chance we were recognized by all the major entities, all the major sporting events, whether it was be baseball, football, or basketball. Didn't do too much with hockey, but again, we were there and we were on the scene and our presence was felt. So that's basically the synopsis of, well, I guess answered your question that you asked at the beginning.
You did, and then specifically what you did with Bob Johnson at BET was to focus on HBCU sports. And when I was growing up, I knew about Howard because it was around the corner and my father was there for a hot minute. And I knew about Grambling because on Sunday mornings before the NFL, Grambling had a 30-minute show that came on. But you put the spotlight on the SWAC, and on the MEAC, and on the CIAA. And we're talking about the South. Why did you all focus on HBCUs, and what kind of impact did you hope to have on the nation, and what kind of impact did you have on the nation by showing those games?
Well, one of the things you mentioned it right off the bat. You only saw Grambling on Sunday morning. You knew about Howard. There was no exposure given to historically black colleges and universities. Grambling probably got more exposure than anybody else because of Eddie Robinson. And they went to Japan. They were all over the place. And they were probably the most popular in terms of geographically bringing awareness to HBCUs, especially football. Like I said, with Eddie Robinson, and they had a heck of a sports information guy by the name of Charlie Nicholson, who made sure that they were exposed and they always got the publicity that was needed. And every now and then, maybe during the season, you might see one or two Grambling games on ABC. All right. They would maybe bring a game on twice during the season. Bob Johnson and I said, look, there's a lot more than just Grambling out there. There are other teams that are doing well, that are putting people in the Hall of Fame, the Walter Paytons, the Lem Barneys, the Mel Blunts, and these are players coming out of the South. Kenny Houston, and you go on and on and on. And why shouldn't we expose these other schools and give the viewing audience a close-up view of what's happening as far as athletics is concerned at these particular institutions, because they're not getting it anywhere else.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us today, Mr. Charlie Neal. And I'm pretty confident in saying that Claflin has not been featured in these HBCU football broadcasts because we dropped football in 1964.
Well, yeah, that has something to do with it.
Yeah, just a tad. Our bookstore used to sell a T-shirt that said Claflin football undefeated since 1964. But
well, that's true.
Right. But we're fortunate to be right next to it, across the fence from South Carolina State University. Right. I will often tell my students at Claflin, I always point out that one school has produced the most number of NFL Hall of Famers. And it's not Clemson, and it's not the University of South Carolina. It's SC State.
South Carolina State.
They're always surprised by that until they realize who the caliber of player who went to SC State for most of the 20th century. Could you talk a bit more about why football is so important to the history of HBCUs? Because when I was growing up in the 1990s, my primary exposure to HBCUs was actually seeing games on BET and learning about some of these universities and seeing these wonderful traditions.
Well, you got the Harry Carsons you talked about. And one of the things you've got to remember, when you look at the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and just about everybody who is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame from an HBCU, at the time that they went to school, there were places they couldn't go. They couldn't go anywhere but to an HBCU. You look at all the people, Robert Brazil, Walter Payton, Lem Barney at Jackson State. You look at Mel Blount and Harold Carmichael at Southern University. I'm just, some of the names, and all the people that Grambling put out there. that are in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and all the other schools that have people in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, most of them came along and played in the 60s or 70s when you couldn't go to Alabama. You couldn't go to Ole Miss. You couldn't go to Tennessee. Now, you could go to Notre Dame. You could go to UCLA. You could go to Southern Cal. I mean, we talked about the fact that Sam Cunningham,
Right.
and when he was playing, he came into Alabama and ran all over Bear Bryant's team, and he said, I got to get me some of them, because they didn't have any African Americans on the team at the time. But again, for that to happen, it was unheard of in terms of African Americans going to PWIs, and especially PWIs in the South. So where did you wind up going? You went to Grambling, you went to Southern, you went to Albany State, you went to Tuskegee. The thing is, they didn't have a choice of where they went to school. And again, they made the most of it. The coaches did a fantastic job. Whether you're talking about Jake Gaither at Florida A&M, who had Bob Hayes, you're talking about Marino Cassim at Alcorn State University. You talk about, of course, Eddie Robinson. And you talk about W.C. Gordon at Jackson State. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Ironically enough, my cousin, most people may not realize this, played at Howard. Steve Wilson went on to play with the Denver Broncos and then came back and became the head coach of his alma mater and won a national championship with Jay Walker and Flea Harrell and people like that. I got a chance to see these people right, at the beginning of their careers. And then, of course, you had the more modern day players like Steve McNair, whose brother went to Alcorn State, Fred McNair, and then he followed his brother and went over to Alcorn State. We know that there's prospects. We know that there's players that deserve to be drafted, and we get disappointed. We feel bad at the end of the draft that nobody from an HBCU has been drafted, but they do know enough. They're not crazy. They still will sign us, because I can get you a lot cheaper by signing you as a free agent than I can by drafting you.
It's important to note that college football is such an integral part of Southern life. And could you talk a bit more about that, about how important it is to folks in the South?
Well, especially, it's interesting because of the times of year. Early part of the football season, September, is very hot on a Saturday afternoon. So that's why most of the games they're played in the evening. But again, it's like a family affair. It's like a gathering. It's like a homecoming, even though it may not be homecoming for that day or that game, but it's a chance for people to get together, tailgate, have fun. Our games are mostly on a Saturday, and you pull into the stadium to go to practice on Friday, and the parking lot is full of RVs on Friday. People are getting ready for the next day. They're getting ready for Saturday. And, they're always inviting you to come by and partake in their tailgating. And they do it up like you would not believe. It's like a ritual. And they look at the schedule when it comes out. They have plans. And here's the other thing about the South, and especially at HBCUs, is the family affair. Okay? So my brother went to Southern University. I went to Grambling. There's a lot of that going on especially at HBCUs. My sister went to Prairie View. I went to Texas Southern. My cousin went to Alabama A&M, and I'm in Alabama State. So that gives them some bragging rights. An opportunity to boast about their particular universities, their particular schools, and their particular teams. Who's going to do what. One of the biggest games on HBCU calendar right now is Alabama A&M and Alabama State in the Magic City Classic. They play that end of October every year down in Birmingham, Alabama. And you better get there on Thursday. Otherwise, you're not going to get there. I'm just saying that's a big game. The Florida Classic between Bethune and Florida A&M. That's big. Of course, the Bayou Classic, Grambling and Southern University. Those are games that just traditionally draw a lot of people. Again, A lot of it has to do with bragging rights. A lot of it has to do with, you know, I, I need to be a part of what's happening at this HBCU. And of course, we go to games I'm at games every week. And it's ironic enough. I'll look out sometimes, even at homecomings. And when kickoff comes, there's many people outside the stadium as inside the stadium. But then at halftime, when the bands are competing, okay, bragging rights for the bands. The bands are competing, they're all inside. As soon as the bands leave, stands empty again. They come in to see the band. The bands draw as much attention to historically black colleges and universities as anybody else, believe it or not. That's what it's all about. People live to brag about whether it's the Sonic Boom of the South or the J Sets who are dancing all over the place, or the Golden Girls at Alcorn, or, you name it. You name it.
That's a great part of the culture.
Yes, it is.
One of the things we've talked about on this episode in terms of Southern football is what it has meant to the South in terms of PWIs, who have used it as a way to show that they are as equal to and certainly no less than people in the rest of the country, right? Their school teams can go and beat the best in the North.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if you've seen the same thing with HBCU football in terms of black folks pointing to it or using it as a way to show their worth within a region that for so long, as you pointed out, didn't even allow black folks to go to their schools.
It's hard to say that the South is stronger than the North. A lot of people want to say that. Of course, Jackson State won the Celebration Bowl this year after the third try because they were there twice with Deion, and they were back there again this year. Florida A&M won it the year before. But Florida A&M is a Southern school, but had just moved a few years ago from the MEAC to the SWAC, along with Bethune-Cookman. So again, even from the PWI standpoint of view, for whatever reason, the South Carolinas, Auburns, the Alabamas, the LSUs, for whatever reason, they seemingly, and I don't know what causes this, but they seemingly can dominate, except for this past year when Ohio State decided and Notre Dame said, we're going to knock you guys off, but Georgia, just traditionally over the years, you look at the SEC and you said dominance.
We have mentioned a few times this afternoon Deion Sanders. Deion, coaching at Jackson State, has really unleashed what folks are calling the Deion effect of former NFL players, former black NFL players, now getting coaching experience at HBCUs.
Yeah.
What do you think the impact of Deion Sanders has been, A, on HBCU football in recent years, and B, in terms of making them a destination for potential head coaches?
What Deion was able to do, he did a lot for HBCUs. And most presidents right now are looking. There's, I think, 9 coaches, possibly 10, that played in the NFL that are coaching at HBCUs. You got Sam Shade. You've got Eddie Robinson at Alabama State. You've got Michael Vick now at Norfolk State. You got Deshaun Jackson at Delaware State. And Deion did a lot for HBCUs and for recognition. Look at the things that Jackson State was able to gain in terms of publicity while he was there. The morning show was done. Good Morning America was done from his campus. They did the game day from the campus at Jackson State. These are things that would never, ever happen at an HBCU.
Now, you've covered HBCU football for years, HBCU sports in general for years. You have lived largely in and around the Washington, D.C. area and elsewhere, but you're someone who has become very familiar with the South.
Mm-hmm.
And so I want to ask you, when you hear someone say the phrase, the New South, what does that mean to you as someone who's covered sports in the South for so long?
I really don't know what to say about the New South because it's the same to me. I don't see, to be honest with you, I don't see any significant difference in the other than the fact, as I said, players who were not able to go to some of the PWIs back then now can. So a lot of the HBCUs were losing those players that would normally go to Alcorn or Southern or Albany State or Tuskegee. They're now going elsewhere. But other than that, personally, I have not noticed any significant change in terms of the South in itself. I mean, I can eat places I couldn't eat maybe years ago. I can stay places I couldn't stay years ago. With desegregation, that's, if you want to call that part of the New South, that allows me a little more freedom of movement, and options and choices of what I do and where I go, and I don't have to go in the back door and I don't have to sit in the kitchen to eat, those types of things, if you want to talk about the New South. But other than that, I've been very fortunate. Since 1980, I've traveled throughout the South significantly and exclusively, and I've never had any issues in hotels, rental cars, or anything else. So, I mean, I've been, I guess fortunate, or been in the right place at the right time,
I am thinking about that question. I spent a weekend at the 25th anniversary, I think it was, of the Soul Bowl.
Yes.
Okay, Grambling Southern. And one of the things that stunned me that particular game was, if I'm not mistaken, if my memory is correct, both teams had white quarterbacks.
Yes.
Southern and Grambling. And I don't think that people think about HBCUs as being open to all, right? They think about them being
exclusively
yes, for Black students.
Right.
And so in that context, and you've seen this everywhere, have things changed for HBCUs in the South since you've been covering them?
Yeah, because coaches are looking to win. Okay, if you're a coach, you're looking to win, and whatever you're looking for the best talent. Jeremy Musa, white gentleman who carried Florida A&M to the championship of the Celebration Bowl last year. White quarterback. Okay, so I think, and I believe that even as fans in the South and fans of these particular schools, I think when it first started happening, they were kind of looking at it. We have a tendency to look out the corner of our eye, right, and say, what's he doing? But then when there's success behind it, okay, if you're a fan and your team, you don't care what color he is. Can he throw the ball? Can he get it to his receivers? Can he manage the game as a quarterback? And, some of the top players have come out of these schools each and every year. I mean, I look at Eddie Robinson had a linebacker last year, a white kid, who was just ripping up the conference in the SWAC, as a linebacker. So again, as a coach, I'm looking for players. I'm looking for people who are going to put me in a position to win.
You've done all sports, pro, college, HBCUs, PWIs. Is there a comparison that you would make between PWI football games, a big one, and an HBCU football game, a big one? What's the through line?
Preparation. My preparation. I mean, seriously, because I'm not going to prepare any differently if I was doing Georgia and Alabama than I am if I was doing Grambling and Southern. Okay? You know what you have. You spend time with the coaches. You have a production call. You talk to them about their players, what their theme is, what their goals are, what the do's and don'ts, the good, bad, and the ugly of each team, and you just look for a good game.
Well, Charlie Neal, that's but one reason that you are a Hall of Famer, and we are lucky to have you on this show because your professionalism has leveled the field of broadcasting of these games so that no one can tell the difference other than looking at the screen that they're watching PWIs play or HBCUs play. And the gravitas that you brought to the games over the years is really, really special. So we at Our New South, thank you for your work and thank you for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Kevin. And anytime you need me to come by, you let me know. I'll be glad to do that.
From the history of radioactive makeup to all the loony things Henry VIII did to ensure we never stop making movies about him, Weird History is a podcast that answers all the questions you didn't even know you had about the most unbelievable people, places, and events of the past. Based on the hugely successful YouTube channel, Weird History invites you to bone up on what it was like to use a public bathroom in ancient Rome while learning about the single worst year of all time. Don't worry, we missed it by a millennium or so. Then get the skinny on modern history, like the true story behind The Conjuring, and just what the hell Steven Seagal did to get banned from SNL. Let Weird History be your guide to the stranger side of history they don't teach you in school. Because the past is weird, a lot weirder than you think. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Our next guest is Dr. Eric Bain-Selbo. Dr. Eric Bain-Selbo, a scholar whose work sits at the fascinating intersection of sports, religion, and society. As a newly appointed dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Southeast Missouri State University, Dr. Bain-Selbo has spent years exploring how college football, particularly in the South, transcends the game itself, becoming a powerful force of identity, tradition, and even faith.
His book, Game Day and God, Football, Faith, and Politics in the American South, examines how college football functions as a modern religious experience, shaping communities and culture in profound ways. His expertise even landed him as a featured scholar in the ESPN documentary College Football 150, Football is Us, the College Game. Our New South welcomes Dr. Eric Bain-Selbo. Dr. Bain-Selbo, thank you for joining us today. And first off, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do for a living.
I am currently the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Southeast Missouri State University here in Cape Girardeau. So right on the Mississippi, just on the western side, furthest west I've ever lived, and did not cross the Mississippi by much. And so I've been here 3 years. I've had an academic career, sort of bounced around to various places, ended up in administration at some point, that like some of us do. And then my academic background is in religious studies and philosophy.
Excellent, excellent. And of course, you are someone who is from the South. We were talking before we began recording today about being from Tennessee. Now, I have to say I'm from Georgia, so I will keep all my comments about Georgia, Tennessee to myself. Just know that growing up in the 1990s, it seemed like it was a rule for us to lose Tennessee every single year. But
yeah.
With that being said, how has being from the South, how has that influenced your work, especially as an academic who studies the South and Southern culture?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Having grown up in the South, and I was born into a military family, and so we had sort of bounced around a little bit. But then when my parents got divorced, my mom, who was from Nashville, Tennessee, moved us back there, and so I was pretty young at the time, and so I consider myself a Southerner because I grew up there. And so it's sort of growing up, and then I went to the University of Tennessee. It spent all my formative years, in the South. I actually hadn't thought much about being from the South until I left the South. So I did a master's degree at Miami, Ohio. So I was in Oxford, Ohio, which Southern Ohio is just out kind of in the South, not quite in the South. But then I went to the University of Chicago for my doctoral work. I show up in Chicago and I'm at parties with other graduate students. And I realized I just didn't have the same sort of, cultural references that they had. Right. I was really a sort of fish out of water. And I also, when I talked to people about being from the South, I knew that they carried certain stereotypes about the South that I had never thought of before because I always was living in the South. It was an interesting sort of experience to realize that I had this identity that I hadn't ever even thought about, right? Until I encountered people from other regions of the country. And so that was a unique opportunity for me as not only a scholar, but as somebody from the region to really think more deeply about the South and then think more deeply about this thing that I loved, which was college football. certainly what fueled my work about thinking about college football in the South was, this experience of growing up in the region, this passion for the game. And really part of it was kind of a self-discovery, like, thinking more critically about where I came from, what it meant. When I go back to Knoxville, and this is part of that sense of community, right? Feeling at home. When I walk onto the campus and, the tailgating's going on and the band's about to march through campus and you go into the game and the Pride of Southland Marching Band, their opening sort of performance on the field before they form the T and the team comes running out, it has not changed in decades. And there's something reassuring about that, right? It's this, preservation of these traditions that sort of bind you to one another. I know I missed that when I couldn't experience that on a regular basis. And I'm glad I have the opportunity now to do that.
And is there something particular about college football in the South that is so different from every place else? I mean, we've talked about religious devotion in the South.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about football devotion in the South. So what part of college football really kind of defines the South, or the South kind of defines college football?
We have empirical evidence that the on the field performance is better than other regions of the country, right? And I'm thinking about the SEC has the SEC commercials that come on during the game. It just means more. And in my research, what I do is, I go back a long way historically to try to figure out, like, why does it mean more, right? And even if we don't want to say it means more, because I know that Michigan fans or Ohio State fans or whatever are going to get all up in an uproar about this, it means something different. And I think that if you trace the history, and really you can go back to Reconstruction, late 19th century forward, if you trace the history, college football became this vehicle for the South to represent itself to the other regions of the country. And so you're talking about a region that had high infant mortality rate, incredibly high poverty rate, rampant violence, rampant racism, high levels of illiteracy, and was generally looked down upon by people in other regions of the country. And so here was this thing, right, that Southerners could hang their hat on and say, we may be a bunch of country bumpkins, but we just kicked your ass in football. If there's an SEC team playing a team from another region, most Southerners will root for the SEC team because it's still us against them sort of mentality. Although I have to say, as a Tennessee grad, I just can't root for Florida.
Thank you for that honesty.
I know. I've tried. I can even root for Alabama. I can do that. I just can't. I can't root. So my apologies to any Florida fans who may hear this podcast. I just can't do it.
Well, as someone who is a degree holder from the University of South Carolina, I can assure you that my inferiority complex is always on 100.
There you go.
See teams play, but I digress. But I want to go back to something you just said about, because there's a lot to unpack here. But one thing I want to focus on briefly is the role of race in all of this. An article you wrote, which has one of my favorite titles, From Lost Cause to Third and Long, you talk about the idea of Southern civil religion and football.
Yeah.
And you have a quote, a line in here I want to read, talking about this. You said, however, college football, increasingly has become an integral part of Black Southern civil religion as well. In other words, it perhaps has led to a broader Southern civil religion that transcends racial divisions. Could you talk a little bit more about the role of college football in post-civil rights Southern America in terms of how it brings folks together who during the rest of the week may not have much in common culturally, politically, or socially?
College football played a role in supporting and maintaining Jim Crow and segregation. But it also played a role in moving beyond that, right? So I think a fair story is one in which we we can be highly critical of the role of college football in maintaining some of the racial divisions in the South. And we can also acknowledge that it played some positive role eventually in moving us in a different direction. And so I do think that sport has that, ability to bring people together over lots of different sort of divisions to engage in a more human way with one another, right? And so in that sense, I think there's, maybe from the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when integration really started to happen with major college football in the South forward, I think, by and large, it's a very positive story for football.
I'm glad that Robert brought up the issue of race, and I appreciate you as a clairvoyant, because I'm thinking here about the title of this show, Our New South. And so in laying out the history of the South, from the enslaved to those who made wealth off of the enslaved, to the development of college football, which was all white and to entertain all white audiences, and largely today still entertains those same audiences, and has caused some of us, looking at the entire college landscape, the economic framework of that landscape. And it seems like in this, whatever this idea is of the New South, which hopefully you can define in your own vision, we have in the Southeastern Conference, which is the conference of all conferences, young black men who are generating all this wealth for the universities, and which leads some of us to apply a plantation economic lens to what is going on now. So I'm trying to figure out what is the difference between this New South, and which I'd love you to define, and maybe the Old South that gave birth to the college football experience or development that we have in the South right now.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, this isn't the first New South, right? I mean, there's New South in the early 20th century, and the Southern agrarians were a response to that, and sort of a rejection of industrialism and capitalism. And I think on a positive note, the South that I think of is one that wants to preserve more things that are cultural as opposed to political or maybe even economic, right? I mean, the colleague and I wrote an article a couple of years ago in which we used and he came up with the analogy of mason jars, right? So mason jars are what you use to preserve peaches or tomatoes or whatever. And I think sport is a kind of cultural mason jar, right? Where things like food and music and how we should be courteous to one another and Southern hospitality. I mean, when I was doing the research for the book, I can't tell you how many wings and ribs and all I ate, because people would just invite me into their tailgating, and sport and kind of regional and national pride, right? That college football becomes one of those places that brings all of those things together and puts it in a mason jar and just preserves it for you. I think culturally, the New South, I think most people want to preserve that cultural identity, right? That difference in some way, but get rid of those things that make the South different in a really negative way. And I'm sure you all have conversations with, economists and politicians, and, like the South is changing dramatically in terms of sort of economic structures and stuff like that. But in terms of those cultural touchstones, I think most people don't want to change.
That you mentioned that, I was just thinking about a few years ago in the wake of George Floyd's murder and how that rippled through the South, and particularly the state of Mississippi, where black college football players boycotted practice and protested quite vociferously. And one of the things they protested against was the Confederate imagery within the Mississippi flag. And finally, after all these years of other people screaming about it, they listened to the football players and changed the flag.
We've been talking a lot about the past and the present of college football in the South. I want to talk a second about the future of college football. How do you think, number one, NIL deals will affect that future? And number two, Southern college football has almost become a national sport in its own right, and how it's covered, how it's shown on television, et cetera. Where do you see the future of Southern college football in general going? How is it going to change, if at all, over time? Because you've mentioned a lot about wanting to preserve culture, wanting to preserve Southern culture. How is that going to be affected in the years to come as Southern college football becomes bigger and bigger and bigger?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure I have great answers for that. I mean, I think adding Texas and Oklahoma doesn't necessarily surprise me as schools to enter the conference. And I understand, so much of this is about making money, but I think there really would be a huge uproar if the Southeastern Conference at some point decided to abandon its regional identity. I mean, I just can't imagine it ever happening. I think the thing with NIL is really how it manifests itself with the transfer portal, right? I mean, it's not so much that, I'm for these athletes, especially at this really high level that we're talking about. We know that a single injury can end your career, right? And why in the world should you just be making money for a bunch of, other people, right? And so I'm all for NIL, but the consequence of that is that you got these players who, and I don't blame them, right? The system is built this way, who shop themselves around. And, 1 year they're playing for one team, 1 year for another team, another year for somebody else. And, I think that, the sort of unique thing about football is, the individuality of the player is sort of covered up with the uniform and a helmet, right? So there's a certain level of, you can keep changing the players, and fans will be okay because it's always the same uniform and the same helmet. But I think something is lost in that, the way in which fans sort of come to love particular players, really identify with them. When Peyton Manning made the announcement that he was coming back for his senior year, I mean, it was monumental, I think, another Manning, I think it's Arch Manning. It's to his credit that he stayed around in Texas when Ewers came back this year, right? A lot of players wouldn't do that. And I wouldn't have blamed him if he had left. But I think that this constant changing of players, is a little bewildering, and we do lose something in that. Now, I'm not sure that what we lose is worse than not paying players, right? So, there's always the trade-offs. So I'm for NIL, but I realize that we lose something in that process.
This has been spectacular. I wish we could talk longer, but at the end of the day, I think we'd all agree that Southern football, particularly football in the SEC, has never been bigger than it is now.
Yep.
Despite all the changes that have happened recently in college football and maybe over the last 50 years.
I don't see it slowing down.
No.
Yeah.
No. Well, thank you again for joining.
Hey, happy to do it. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, this is great.
So I think we just had a really interesting set of interviews, Kevin, about college football in the South. And both Charlie Neal and Eric Bain-Selbo made some excellent observations about how Southern college football isn't just about the results on the field. It's also about making Southerners proud of themselves. On the one hand, for Dr. Eric Bain-Selbo, how the white South trying to prove itself to the rest of the country. And for Charlie Neal, how HBCU football allowed Black Southerners to prove themselves on the gridiron as well.
Absolutely. And it was great to listen to Charlie Neal just name all of the great Black football players from HBCUs that have come along over the years, and most of them not from Grambling, which is what most of us have come to know HBCU football for. I know for me, growing up in Washington, D.C., even though I was right next to Howard University, down the pike from Morgan State, I really grew up with Grambling football because they had a national television show on Sunday mornings for about 30 minutes. And so that's how I became knowledgeable about Coach Rob and all the great players there. But Charlie Neal has made his life's work to broadcast as much information as he can about the entire scope of HBCU football. And he just named all the great schools, great programs, great coaches, and great players who have come out of those programs and now play for PWIs with the desegregation of college football as a whole. And they have proved their worth, and even more so when we look at the game today.
Right. And, Eric Bain-Selbo's interview was eye-opening for me because it made me realize why, even as a young boy growing up in Georgia, games involving UGA or Georgia Southern, Georgia Tech seemed to mean a bit more to me than the games involving the Atlanta Falcons the following day. How there was much more emotion involved, and it was a sense of having to prove oneself as a Southerner. I think one of the key themes of our series has been how the South, even in the 21st century, still has a chip on its shoulder, whether it's white Southerners, black Southerners, immigrants. And we see all of this on Saturday afternoons and evenings in the fall. Again, both of our guests were really passionate about the importance of college football to the South. And they really helped me make sense of why this game matters so much to me, even today in the 21st century.
And even in our next segment, because it is about the struggle for better women's health care in the South, it also illustrates how the South is a proving ground, once again, for a critical issue. So whether it's integration in sports that we just touched on with Southern college football, or in this case, the fight for equitable health care for women in this country, which is really centered on what is going on in the South. It is really a proving ground for how we can handle this issue better going forward for the rest of the country.
Really, a central theme of Southern history has been, how can we make the South better? And I can think of no better example of that in terms of how we can make things better than taking a closer look at women's health care, which is our episode next week. I can't wait for folks to hear this because we've got some folks on the ground in the South doing some great and necessary work right now.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? It's like we got a demo tape and nobody want to hear it, but it's like this is South got something to say.
Our New South is presented by Levine Museum of the New South. Levine Museum connects the past to the future to realize the promises of a New South. To learn more and donate to projects like this, visit museumoftheNewSouth.org.
Our New South is produced by Next Chapter Podcast. Thanks to editor and sound designer Kyle Murdoch, producers Brian Douglas, Alexander Piñeres, and Cliff Whitfield, senior producer and writer Byron Hunter, and executive producers Jeremiah Tittle and Frankie Abbott. Please follow the show, subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Learn more at nextchapterpodcast.com/Our New South.
Thanks for listening.
South got something to say.
From the history of radioactive makeup to all the loony things Henry VIII did to ensure we never stop making movies about him, Weird History is a podcast that answers all the questions you didn't even know you had about the most unbelievable people, places, and events of the past. Based on the hugely successful YouTube channel, Weird History invites you to bone up on what it was like to use a public bathroom in ancient Rome while learning about the single worst year of all time. Don't worry, we missed it by a millennium or so. Then get the skinny on modern history, like the true story behind The Conjuring, and just what the hell Steven Seagal did to get banned from SNL. Let Weird History be your guide to the stranger side of history they don't teach you in school. Because the past is weird, a lot weirder than you think. Subscribe now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Next Chapter Podcasts.